All right, welcome to Tanya Summary Shiur, week 7. We're doing Prakim Chaf through Chaf Beis. This week was a little bit challenging because we kind of go on to a new tangent, and I'm trying to think always about how to connect everything to make it go as a flow. But in a certain sense, I'm forced to say that we're kind of taking a tangent to discuss a separate topic, which will ultimately lead back into the point that Alter Rebbe is ultimately trying to explain, which is the pasuk of Kikar v'lacha davar ma'id, and how is it ma'id. We explained already, and where we're coming from is that Jews have a natural love and fear towards Hashem, and we could utilize this love and fear, and it might not be the highest order of love and fear because it's natural and it's inborn, and it's not something from nothing that you're creating a love out of thin air, but nevertheless, it's love that inspires a person to practical avodah, and this is the avodah beinanim. This is going to be a theme which we elaborate upon a little bit later, but for now, we're going to go off and we're going to try to explain the importance of mitzvahs, and in order to do that, we're going to go off on a little bit of a detour. So, the Alter Rebbe starts off Parak Chaf by saying that all mitzvahs are an extension of the first two of the Aseres HaDibros, Anochi and L'Yeh Lecha. There's actually a famous poem or book, if you will, from Rav Sadia Gaon, where he elaborates on all of the Aseres HaDibros and how they really include the 613 mitzvahs within them. Anochi and L'Yeh Lecha are known to be the klolos of the mitzvahs, the general inclusion of all of the mitzvahs. And it's explained in many svarim that the mitzvah of Anochi, a positive mitzvah, contains within it all of the positive mitzvahs, and the mitzvah of L'Yeh Lecha contains within it all of the negative mitzvahs. And there are many svarim that mention this, and it's also brought in the Gemara that the only two mitzvahs which we heard directly from Hashem were Anochi and L'Yeh Lecha, and it was too much for the Yidden to handle, such a revelation of godliness, and therefore they requested from Moshe Rabbeinu that Moshe Rabbeinu be the middleman to serve between the Yidden and Hashem, so they could receive the mitzvahs without being overwhelmed by such a godly revelation every time. So, the Alter Rebbe says, this is something itself that we need to understand as well. So, he launches off on a tangent, kind of, to explain that. So, he says, we always say that there's Achdus Hashem. We always say that there's unity of Hashem. What does it mean that there's unity of Hashem? So, the Alter Rebbe says that there's no difference by Hashem between before the world was created or after the world was created. Ultimately, everything is completely nullified. Everything is completely null and void before Hashem. And even though Hashem created the world, there's no new existence. Now, this is going to be really the focus of the remainder of the chapter and the remainder of the chapters for the week, Prakim Chaf Aleph and Chaf Beis, and maybe even a little bit beyond that to a certain extent. But this is how he continues, and he gives an example. He says it's a mashal, that as humans, something that we do to communicate is we speak. Now, when we speak, we take an idea of ours, which may come from our soul, it may come from our inner desires. Something inspires us that we want to do something. We want to interact with the world. We want to have something new, something different. So that feeling rises from within ourselves, and it goes up to the mind. So we start thinking about it. It goes from the subconscious to the conscious. It goes from feeling a feeling in the heart, not a feeling like an emotion, but a feeling, a yearning, desire in the heart, and it goes to the mind. Then a person thinks about it in the mind, and that inspires an emotional reaction. It could just be a purely intellectual thing, but usually there's some kind of emotional reaction if it's going to come into practicality to inspire a person to speech. If it's something that just stays a thought, it could just stay a thought, it could end over there. But it'll inspire some kind of feeling. And once it inspires some kind of feeling, that feeling then inspires a person to contemplate it. As in, even though it could be a conscious thought, it doesn't mean that that's something that's necessarily complicated. It's just something which is appreciated in the mind. But if it's going to come to practicality, it needs to be consciously thought about. Then, after it gets some time percolating in conscious thought, it then goes forward into the next stage, and whatever the next stage may be. And in certain instances, when it comes to just pure basic communication, it goes into speech. Speech is really, you would say, the highest order of a practical distillation of any feeling, because speech is really the same things that you have in the mind, just expressed. It's closer to a person than, I don't know, let's say if a person gets inspired that they want to build a chair. So they build the chair and then they walk away and the chair stands as an independent thing. Speech is much closer to a person, as in even at the final stage, it's still the thoughts of a person just expressed for the outside world to hear. Now, in order for things to go from thought into speech, there needs to be a distillation process. The thought needs to be chopped up and divided into words which contain the essence of the idea, but ultimately it makes its way down into speech. Now, really, all of these details technically exist in a very vague way from the original desire. Let's say a person wants to communicate, tell their child that they love them. So the feeling wells up in the heart. Now, is that feeling a bunch of words? Is it the 3 words of I love you? It isn't the 3 words of I love you. It's a feeling of love that ultimately may come yet to be expressed in the 3 words of I love you. But it exists there kind of concealed in the feeling, and then it goes up to the mind, and it's something that's appreciated in the mind in a few different stages. First is the idea of just love and what it is, then there's the fact that love has all of these things that it implies, and then there's the fact that it's not just a theoretical concept of love, but it's an actual concept of love which applies to the person. They'll think about it in their mind, they'll mull it over, and then ultimately, I mean, even if that mulling over takes a matter of a few seconds or even a split second, but it will be something which is very consciously appreciated in the mind, and then it expresses itself as the 3 words of I love you. Now, the 3 words I love you really existed in potential in the original feeling, and it existed in potential in the notion which existed in the mind, and it also existed in potential in the thought. It really only came into words in the realm of thought, and then it got expressed through the mouth of the vocal cords, the lungs, everything pushing out those 3 words of I love you. So this is all the example, if you'll remember. This is the end of chapter 20. The nimshal isn't really something which is elaborated upon per se, but the nimshal would then be that Hashem speaks the world into existence. We know that it says in the Mishnah that Hashem created the world with 10 utterances. So Hashem spoke the world into existence, and the point is to bring out something, which where we're going with that, we'll see in Eretz Hashem, but to bring out something about how Hashem creates the world and how it goes from the feeling to the expression, and the Alter Rebbe is going to have to lay down some ground rules for how really Hashem isn't actually a person and it's not actual speech, and the mashal is an important mashal to appreciate for the details that it brings out, and also to kind of take a step back and say certain things also don't apply to Hashem. So, just to recap, the point of the mashal that the Alter Rebbe gives is to say that just like when a person speaks, it goes from being a feeling in the soul, it goes to being an expression, and the expression of the person is really a non-existence relative to the person, which this isn't really stated clearly as the thing to take away from the parable, but this is what the Alter Rebbe is trying to bring out. So, ultimately, in a very similar way, when Hashem creates the world with 10 utterances, it says in the Mishnah that He created the world with 10 utterances, so the world is also a non-existence relative to Hashem, which that relates back to the point of unity of Hashem, and that relates to Neichi and Le'yelecha, and this is ultimately going to try to bring us to an appreciation of mitzvahs and Ava and Yira and practical avodah. So, the Alter Rebbe says that this parable of the same way that a person relative to the speech is the same thing like Hashem relative to the world is actually not entirely accurate. And the first point that he makes about why it's not entirely accurate is because when a person says something, the thing that they say becomes a separate entity from them, if you will. It becomes something which is out there in the loose, no longer connected. If a person makes a statement in 2012, especially if that statement was recorded or on Twitter, it gets out there, it's out of hand, and there's no way of taking it back. It's not attached to the person. It's definitely going to come up in a 2024 job interview or something like that. But no, Lagabe Hashem, obviously the jokes aside, Lagabe Hashem, when Hashem says something, it doesn't become a separate existence. There's no place for sound to reverberate when there's no place and there's no sound and there's no anything. Everything is created, everything is part of Hashem. So you can't say that there's a place where the speech goes, there's another person that exists that Hashem is talking to. No, it's all taking place as far as Hashem goes. When we say that Hashem speaks, what we say is really that you have a concept of, let's say, thought by Hashem. Now, even the concept of thought is something which is created by Hashem. You could keep on going up, and it would be nice to start explaining all the levels, how you could say that that's now a creation, Lagabe Hashem, and how what it was before, and how you got to that place. That's not what we're talking about right now. But ultimately, you have a concept of machshava, you have a concept of thought that exists by Hashem. Now, thought is obviously something which isn't separate from you, because I could think thoughts in my mind that have nothing to do with anyone else, only about me. A person could think about the notion of thinking. It doesn't require any other existence in order to have a thought. The concept of speech by Hashem is to take that concept of thought and to then be able to express it to the world, to be able to reveal it to the world. Now, there's no world to reveal it to be clear, at this point, but that's what speech means by Hashem. It's to take the concept of thought and to apply to the same function that you and I would apply to thought in order to arrive at something spoken. By us, it'll actually get expressed because there's a whole other existence. By Hashem, there's no other existence, but it's still the concept of applying the function of expression to his thought. The Alter Rebbe emphasizes that every single level that you have by Hashem, if you'll call it a hishtalshalos, or a chain of cause and effect, that Hashem has a desire, and then that leads to a thought, and that leads to the whole thing that we said before, every single step of the way, everything is connected to Hashem. Everything is in complete unity. There's no distinction. The only distinction that exists is not relative to Hashem, it's relative to us and how revealed it is. How much expression is there. The Alter Rebbe says that about Hashem, it's written, Gam cheshech layacheshech mimeka, that even darkness is not dark before you. That is to say that Hashem creates, in a sense, a level of darkness to, if you will, dim his light for us, so that we can receive it, so that he can communicate with us, so that he can cause us to exist. Really, if we would appreciate God's existence, we wouldn't be able to appreciate our own existence, and Hashem wants us to be able to appreciate our own existence. So Hashem, if you will, dims himself in order for us to be able to appreciate him. But the pasuk says that this dimming of Hashem doesn't apply to him. The darkness that Hashem creates so that he won't outshine us, it doesn't apply as far as he's concerned. And to explain this, the Alter Rebbe gives a mashal of a kamsa, which is either a turtle or a grasshopper, whatever creature it is, but some kind of creature that has an outer layer that grows from itself. Hashem covers himself with himself. There's a certain aspect. This is one of the deepest, most profound concepts in Chassidus, in my humble opinion, from what I know. But the concept of how you have the concept of tzimtzum, the concept of concealment that arises from Hashem himself. But ultimately, yes, Hashem covers himself over with himself in order to facilitate existence, the entire world. So this concludes chapter 21, and the Alter Rebbe spends chapter 22 really driving this point home. And he says that when we say that Hashem spoke into existence, like Asar Ma'amaris, the 10 utterances with which Hashem created the world, the Alter Rebbe says, really, it's an expression of this concept of tzimtzum, and it's using the expression by the parable of Dibur, the parable of speech which we gave before. That's what it's trying to express, but really, tzimtzum is more apt. And the reason why the Mishnah and many other sources use the concept of Dibur, the mashal of Dibur, to express this, is because that's how people speak. This is the way that we can relate to it. We don't normally, I myself don't dim my own light in order for other people to be able to appreciate my presence without being overwhelmed. It's not something that we relate to. What we do is we speak, and that limits our thoughts, our feelings, our innermost desires. We're able to communicate them to another person by means of our words. That's how we take ourselves and we contract ourselves down. But we don't do it in this conscious way of we have a light and it's too much for someone else. It isn't that way as far as we're concerned, because we all exist on the same plane as the people we interact with. So that's why the Torah uses an example of Dibur, but really tzimtzum is more apt. The Alter Rebbe goes on to describe tzimtzum a little bit more, and the main point that he makes is about how you have a concept of klipa, which can arise from tzimtzum, which is to say that Hashem could contract himself so much until you have almost a null space, until you have a place which is, as it were, devoid of him. Now really it's not devoid of him, but it's something which doesn't appreciate his existence, because again, everything is tied up in Hashem's existence perfectly and completely. The only thing is, how much is that appreciated relative to the created? So you can have an existence of klipa, of sitra achra. Sitra achra literally just translates to the other side, the side which isn't godliness. It's the side which you're able to see more clearly when the light of godliness is dimmed. So the Alter Rebbe says, Hashem, through his tzimtzumim, is able to create this other side, this side where you can literally just not appreciate godliness, look directly at it, and not have blurred vision. So the Alter Rebbe says that you might wonder, if you have something which is, in a sense, a lack of godliness, how does that continue surviving if everything is godliness? And to say that there's literally only godliness there and there's no expression of godliness whatsoever, it's a little bit challenging to think about. It's a little bit puzzling to think about. So the Alter Rebbe says that Taka, it receives in a more indirect way. And the Alter Rebbe gives an example for this, that sometimes you give something willingly, and sometimes you give it by force, sometimes you give something to a person that you despise, and you give it, but you don't give it willingly. It's something that just happens. There's many other places in Chassidus where this concept is discussed at length. One of the best examples that I think is just very easy to comprehend is that sometimes you have a meal and you'll cook for the main guests. Then there's also going to be other people by the table that are invited, but they're not the guests of honor. And then you'll have people in the kitchen that also take little snacks from the food that they're preparing, and then ultimately the scraps and the bones will be left for the dogs. You might even make, certain dogs may be special again, but you have the pieces that fall to the floor, the dogs will lick up. So in Chassidus it's explained, this is like a mashal for this level, which we call achirayim. The things which are given over the shoulder, behind the back, the things that you don't really want to give, the things that just happen to be given, because that's the way that the universe is set up. You do have these null spaces, if you will, from godliness, places where you could look directly at them and see absolutely no godliness, and they do receive godliness, they receive vitality from God, but it's given in this kind of over-the-shoulder way that they're a byproduct of existence. They're not the purpose of existence. The Alter Rebbe makes 2 points about this, and he says, the first one is that this level of achirayim receives in a way of what we call makif, that obviously, very understandably, it doesn't internalize godliness, because that's not what it does. It's kind of the whole definitive existence of Sitra Achra, of the other side, is that it doesn't exhibit godliness at all. So the godliness that does sustain it is not something which is appreciated internally, it's something which exists relative to it, but it doesn't internalize it, definitively almost. The Alter Rebbe says that because of this is the concept of Avodah Zarah, the concept of something which can't be nullified to godliness, something that you could look at and see a complete lack of godliness within it. This is what Klippa is. This is the concept of Klippa. Not always is it something which is worshipped, per se, but the existence of Klippa is that you have something which doesn't fully express godliness, and focusing on the lack of expression of godliness, and internalizing that, appreciating only that is the concept of Avodah Zarah. The Alter Rebbe says, notwithstanding all of these points, notwithstanding the way that things may be appreciated by the observer from below, as far as Hashem is concerned, everything is literally nullified before Him, completely nullified before Him in utter truth. So this concludes chapter 22. As Hashem, took a lot of help from Hashem in order to do this. I had to take a lot of notes in order to try to get from point A to point B and still give something maybe coherent. But ultimately, we're going to continue with explaining in Mirz Hashem next week about how this leads into the concept of Torah and how that relates to Hashem, and many more exciting things, ultimately to explain the importance of Avodah and many more details to come in Mirz Hashem.